This week, we interview Barrett Lyon from Neustar. Then we read an article, a discussion on leadership and innovation, startup success. In startup and security news, you need to know global IPO market on pace for the best year since 2007. SAP makes an acquisition. Google makes an acquisition. OnFido raised $30 million. Vimeo makes a very interesting acquisition. CA Technologies makes yet another acquisition. All that and more on to this episode of Startup Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by... Are you looking for a career where you can make a real difference? Accenture Security is looking for passionate, creative minds to tackle some of the biggest security threats facing us today. Innovative thinkers who want to outmaneuver cybercriminals. They're hiring specialists across the spectrum, from security strategy to cyber defense, digital identity, and application security, helping to deliver holistic solutions. If you want to use next-generation technologies and global resources to change the future of security, visit Accenture.com/security careers. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV's courses live and on demand worldwide, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Their team solution provides access to a supervisor portal for full control over your team's training schedule and group analytics. Go to itpro.tv/startup security and use the code SS30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal. Welcome to Startup Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, for September 29th, 2017. This is episode 57, and of course, this show would not be possible without the lovely Mr. Michael Santarcangelo. Michael, welcome to the show.
Lovely. That's
lovely.
Do people describe me as lovely? I've gotten accustomed to beach bum, and I think somewhere along the line I saw a Giphy where that turns into sand hobo, and I've decided I like that.
The sand hobo himself.
It feels more
Mr.
likely
Michaels.
to be like this. It feels like more like okay,
It
that's
does.
who I am.
It fits you much better.
I can embrace that. So yeah, and I haven't seen you in a couple weeks, so it's we always joke people must think that like we talk every day, and I think if we could, at least I would. I'd take you up on it.
Absolutely.
And we actually scheduled time to talk on Monday, but I haven't really talked to you in a couple weeks, so it's.
I was just telling one of our mutual friends that who we had to schedule time and played phone tag today, that it was a good thing that we're busy enough to have to find time for each other. It means we're busy on hopefully sales calls, which is a good thing, and talking to others in the community and working on projects and managing our businesses. So it's a good thing to be busy, especially an important point to make here on Startup Security Weekly, right? You want to be busy with that stuff.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, what we'll foreshadow for people too is what you and I are going to talk about on Monday involves some potential changes, some improvements, some things that you and I have kicked around for a little bit, and it might be time for us to take some other steps across the whole Security Weekly platform. So it'll be good, and I think folks are going to be curious to see how that turns out. So we'll give them a reason to tune in next week and ask us how it all went.
That's it. So why don't you introduce our special guest for today?
Yeah, I'm excited. So Barrett Lyon is joining us. Barrett, he's one of those people who's a serial entrepreneur, and he's done some pretty cool stuff. I had a conversation with him. I love people that are just no BS, and we talked a lot about distributed denial of service and where we're at and where we need to go. And I'll tell you what, we'll get into some of it as we get here, but he's somebody who's been through this cycle now a couple times. So when we talk about leadership on this program, we talk about innovation, we talk about the idea of getting started, growing it, exiting. Well, he's done that a couple times now. So with that, Barrett, welcome to Startup Security Weekly. Excited you're here, and obviously a lot for us to talk about.
How's it going? Yeah, this is fun. Yeah, I guess I've done, I think, 5 startups now, with all of them with an exit, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, like, what would you like to know?
Well, I'm kind of curious. After you did the first one, did you expect? I mean, there's more here for us to talk about, but since you've done 5 and you've had 5 exits, after you got done with the first one, were you like, that was awesome, I totally want to do it again? Or was it you just kind of tinkered with another problem? Like, that's a pretty impressive track record. So, I mean, is that just in your blood, or I don't know? What have you learned from doing this 5 times?
Yeah, so the first time, it seems like a lot of them get cut short. So for example, Prolexic, I had very long-term plans and goals, and at a certain point, the management and I just disagreed. So I wasn't interested in working with those people any longer. So I wasn't really done in the startup mode or the phase. I still had that energy, so I wanted to do something else. So I remained on the board and did things on that side of the spectrum, and then started another company called BitGravity, which was one of the first video-centric CDNs. So we did content delivery. It was kind of like, security is really intense. So I want to do something that's fun, and dealing with media is a lot easier than like worrying about banks going offline. And then, I just needed that mental break. So I guess it wasn't necessarily I went from doing one thing to the exact same thing. A lot of the overlaps are similar. When you're doing bootstraps like Prolexic or BitGravity, you're scrapping together phones and figuring out where people are working. And it's just all the same kind of really high energy kind of things to do. Getting your first clients, getting your technology working properly. So it's a big thrill to do that kind of stuff. So, I wasn't really done after Prolexic. So I kind of rolled from Prolexic straight into another startup. And then we sold that one, and then rolled into another startup, sold that one. And then I rolled into another startup, which was defense.net. And that was kind of a redo of Prolexic. And again, this nice long timeline of things we'd like to do, and the company from the point where we were funded to the point where we exited was 18 months. So, you build a 5-year plan, and then 18 months later you're out of a job because you got acquired. So I did take a little break then, but it's kind of like one of those things. Once you start doing it, it's hard to stop.
Well, so tell us what you're doing now at Neustar.
So, Neustar, like I was kind of saying, the startup atmosphere for me is very fun. And so as far as my career goes, I kind of wanted to try something new, and that was working at a publicly traded company. And Neustar, I always competed against Neustar with my various startups, and just never understood why it couldn't have the best of breed products. So I reached out to them and I said, hey, I'd love to do kind of a different role in my career. I'd like to focus on R&D, so I don't have to worry about setting up those phones and figuring out where people sit and bootstrapping something. I'm starting with a base that already exists, and the company's not going to get bought in 18 months. So so I had a place to kind of put my energy and kind of was like a home, I guess, that was more permanent than a startup. But what I found is going into this company, I'm bringing a lot of the startup atmosphere into things. We've rebuilt some of the main products within the last 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cool because I'm able to attract, the top talent that I've worked with in the past. So I've got, the guys from Prolexic and people I've been working with for 10 plus 15 years, so you immediately get your team together and you're like, all right, now what are we going to do inside this company that has large budgets? Let's see what we can actually do now. And that's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun.
So are you still focusing on distributed denial of service, DDoS? Is that an area of passion for you, or is that just something you stumbled onto and it just won't let go of you?
I'd say both. I got into it in high school because I was hosting servers that constantly were attacked. And so the methodologies there kind of started to protect and work to kind of keep the machine more resilient than not doing those things. So eventually that kind of evolved, and my fascination with the denial of service piece of security just kind of got deeper and deeper and deeper, because you just start memorizing protocols and RFCs, and eventually you get kind of like this whole vision of what's happening there. And the interesting thing about denial of service attacks is that it's kind of built into IPv4 and IPv6. You can't really make it go away. So until that problem is actually solved, these things are going to continue to happen. So it's not like you can just say, "Oh, denial of service is a solved problem." It's a thing that exists in the core of the internet. So for me, that's fascinating. Because it's a really difficult problem to solve. In fact, it's in its current state not solvable. So it's a puzzle that'll be there for a very long time, and getting better and better at it. It's been quite a bit of fun, though.
In the market, I was just going to say in the market today, since we're on the topic of DDoS protection, I actually know some of the researchers that have kind of been in the past poking some holes in the DDoS protection services. What's your assessment of the research on that, Barrett, since you've been in the space, for some time?
What do you mean, like how to take down the defenses that exist?
Or work around the DDoS protection services to still accomplish DDoS?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. That's what makes it so fascinating to me. I mean, I think Cloudflare just announced today that they have a new mechanism to protect the origin servers. And origin servers are basically where your application or your site exists, and it gets masked by the denial of service protection component. And so what people would do is just go right straight to the origin. If you find the origin server, then you liberate that, and then the thing goes down, and then the big, huge DDoS network does no good. And that's always been a bit of a problem. I think it's worse with larger enterprises because you have a lot of overlapping and easy to discover infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So, for example, like their mail servers might be on an IP block that's like similar to whatever their origin's on, and that happens a lot. So if you just attack their mail server, you could take down their origin server, which then takes down the site. Or, there's just all kinds of discovery mechanisms people use, like bouncing emails to non-existent users to pull the internal IP addresses out and figure out, where things actually exist. Mm-hmm. And enterprises have it worse because they're a lot of the time their infrastructure is more concentrated. Where if you're a small business, you might have like one or two cloud servers somewhere, like maybe on Amazon, and those are hard to find because you can't just go, "Hey, show me, all the cloud servers belonging to this person." That's much more difficult. So there's that. But so masking the cloud infrastructure is probably pretty good. However, it exposes a whole new whole new problem. So with Cloudflare's announcement today, they said something like, we solved that problem by creating basically a virtual private network to communicate between our network and the origin network, origins of their customers. And right away, that brings up a red flag to me, because now all of a sudden, any client of theirs can figure out where the VPN infrastructure is for these guys, mm-hmm. and just attack that and take all their clients down. Mm-hmm. So you've moved the problem from the origin now to like the VPN concentrator side. So, and that's a big problem with large networks like Prolexic too, because they have a lot of GRE terminated services. So you figure out what their GRE infrastructure is, and you could potentially take out and wipe out all their clients.
Right, you could wipe out protection for all of their clients by wiping out that infrastructure.
Yeah, and if they're always on, then you're going to create network blips for those mm-hmm. folks. But most of the time, people have backups and different routes and different transit providers. Let me think. There's another couple of gotchas there. There hasn't really been much research on this, but I've poked at it a bit. The algorithms that are used to do a lot of the defenses these days are very homogeneous. So you'll see, for example, one type of mitigation equipment might be used in a lot of different organizations. So what you end up with is a very predictable algorithm for, say, SYN flood defense. And if you know what you're doing, you can craft attacks to reflect an attack off of one denial of service defense network to another. And there's all kinds of messy things that can happen there.
Huh.
Yeah, not fun stuff.
So being aware of some of those, attacks and limitations, how do you position yourself in the market? How do you, have that startup mentality and differentiate yourself and have a different point of view in the problem?
Well, at Neustar, we know the problem, so we're solving for the problem. It's probably better to not talk about it publicly, but the things that we're doing to protect our customers' infrastructure are much different than other folks. So in that respect, I don't think we'll be as vulnerable. We have pretty good understanding of how the algorithms that we use work and what can be done to them and how to protect against that. So I think we've kind of thought through a couple steps ahead.
Well, yeah, and given your experience, you've probably done a good job of threat modeling in that aspect, which I think a lot of startups, not that Neustar's a startup, but a lot of startups I think need to do in their product space is do that threat modeling and think like an attacker, especially if you're selling into the security space.
Oh man, in the application world, that's absolutely for sure. If you're writing some sort of app that general consumers or internet users hit. And there's so many opportunities to prevent bad things from happening. Just pure threat model development, good thinking while you're writing code. For example, if you know that a user logs in and hits the database and only hits it like a few times, and you count that, and then all of a sudden you catch somebody that's breaking that rule and doing it 1,000 times per minute. You shouldn't let that continue. You should flag it. The application should shut the guy out, and away you go. But because a lot of software isn't written very well, the application stuff, just kind of hasn't been thought through that way. You get really interesting solutions like WAF, for example, to kind of augment what people forgot.
It's interesting, Paul, that you brought this up, and Barrett, as a testament to you. Here's some notes I wrote down last time you and I talked. This is a quote you wrote that I wrote down from you. As the attacks get easier, the use cases get more complicated. And I'm going to have you explain that in a second. But, Paul, it goes to, we always ask, what problem are you trying to solve? And people say, oh, yeah, the problem. It's DDoS. Okay, if you don't actually know what that is, then that's not a problem, right? And by the way, then what are the consequences of that problem? Yeah, it's bad, right? Like, I don't know, someone can't log into an account or something. But what I found, Barrett, talking to you is that, no, there's some interesting creative things that you're starting to see from people. But again, what you said that I thought was really interesting is it's not just that we're going to see that the tools are getting easier. It's as the tools get easier, the use cases get more complicated. I think that's a different way to think about it. So when we look at DDoS, what do most people think about today? And then where do you see some of this potentially going, or what do you think security leaders today might want to start to consider a little bit so they're better prepared than had they not listened to you today?
Yeah, it's going up the stack for sure. So, early on when Prolexic first came around, the attacks were very simple, volumetric type things that went after, just SYN floods or large UDP floods or weird HTTP connection type stuff. It was pretty basic. And, back then it was pretty easy to deal with too because nothing was encrypted. So now all the applications are encrypted. So now the attackers have to be more sophisticated to even do those types of things. So they have to emulate browsers and they have to emulate user interactions with a machine and they're doing it, and that's the level of complexity that's growing. And as they get smarter and they figure out, these simple attacks are really easy to do, and they were successful, but now they're pretty easy to defend against. what else can we do? And if you leverage some giant botnet and then you go straight for the application that goes straight to your databases and find ways that are very specifically engineered to cause damage to that particular site, those are hard things to stop. And I think that that's kind of the direction that we'll be seeing things happen over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. I mean, I think people have at some point either worked in or seen a building where, there's a water main break and there's no water in the building, and they come in and say, folks, there's no water, the bathrooms aren't working, you have to go home today. And you said, imagine there's a disgruntled employee, they go get control, they rent one of these botnets, they attack the building, and the building's got no internet. Business stops, send everybody home.
The modern day fire drill. Actually, so we've seen this happen. A client of ours in the peninsula in the San Francisco Bay Area ran an incubator, large workspace for lots of different companies. Someone got fired and got upset and started launching denial of service attacks to their really feeble business internet connection that ran that office building. And when they did that, everyone had to go home. I mean, there was no way to do work unless you're using your phone's internet, and you might as well just go home anyway if you're going to do that. So email stops, VoIP stops working, and all the stuff people are trying to do goes away. So with that particular one, it was interesting. We were able to actually figure out it was a guy in the parking lot, and every time he connected to the Wi-Fi, he'd get an IP address of the building and then launch the attack to that IP address. So we finally caught him, which was good. But that kind of, opened up a whole Pandora's box. Wow, you have an office building of 20,000 employees and your internet connection's only 10, 20 gigabit. And that's probably high for that kind of site. Those types of attacks are pretty easy to generate. You could send a workforce of 10,000 people home doing stuff like that. So kind of scary.
Well, and one of the things that I read not too long ago was, and it might have been Brian Krebs and others have kind of reported and given us some insights into the entire DDoS underground protection market, which I think is interesting. Barry, I might bring you on another show to talk about that. I think that's a fascinating part of DDoS protection, that this whole underground economy where people are hosting, and is primarily prominent in video game hosting services. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think a lot of it spawns out of just basic need for cheap services for things like Minecraft.
Yes, it was Minecraft. Yeah. Yeah,
Minecraft is really interesting. Supposedly there's actually there's a huge story that comes out of that, but Brian Krebs wrote a really great article about kind of unmasking who is behind one of these large botnets. And it kind of stemmed from the protection racket in Minecraft. I guess, it's kind of interesting. You think of one company does protection, the other company is doing protection, and one wants to put the other one out of business so they can get the other clients. It's kind of ridiculous.
Well, yeah, in that space, the protection companies are also distributed denial of service sending companies. So they'll DOS each other's clients and force them to move to the other provider.
Bucks or $10. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. We've actually worked with one of these testing companies once. It went horrible. We had a company that wanted to kick the tires of our network and hired this testing firm, and they were going to launch a 200 gigabit attack at us. And I don't think they've ever done an attack that large to a single destination. And so they launched the attack at us and then lost control of their botnet, couldn't hit the kill switch. The thing went headless. And then all of a sudden, they weren't aware of all the bandwidth that they were saturating in front of them, not leading up to our network, but leaving their network, that caused all this collateral damage. People got really upset. It's quite a mess. So we actually do defenses for a large ISP, and we see an attack probably every 5, 10, 15 minutes of not large ones, but destined to some kid that's playing a video game somewhere.
Right. Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing how commodity that has become in the seedy underground. Even not so much just like you said, kids playing video games. I want to win the video game, so I'm just going to pay someone to launch a DDoS attack against my competition.
Yeah, and the other funny thing about it, well, I guess it's not funny, but yeah, you have state actors getting involved in this and actually writing tools to launch large attacks. And eventually those tools get leaked, and then those become public domain, and then the whole thing just gets worse, a little bit more nasty.
Yeah.
Again, this is why this problem is so fascinating to me, and I haven't been able to let go of it. It's just because solving it is so intricate, and it involves a really core layer of what's going on with the internet. So it's limitless of entertainment.
Yeah, no, I've definitely grown to appreciate this problem even more so in just talking to you today because of the breadth and scope of the problem you're trying to address and all the various aspects of it in how it comes into play. So,
yeah, it's a weird one. Never really thought that I'd grow up to be the denial service expert, but it's definitely the thing I really think about is how do you make protocols that don't lend themselves to this kind of problem? How do you make protocols and trust models that provide security, provide the freedom of communications like the internet has, but also communicate in a way that you could say, no, I don't want to receive data from these people. These 10,000 people aren't legitimate, like back off. And so I think a lot of what I'm going to be settling into in the next few years is, in an R&D role, I guess, is focusing on what future protocols might look like, how to give guidance to folks that are really interested in developing stuff like that. I've been involved in a few government I wouldn't say think tanks, but more committees that are kind of trying to figure out, well, how do we protect the United States from this kind of problem? And my answer keeps coming back like, hey, well, instead of trying to protect the country from denial of service attacks, why don't we try to figure out how to build a protocol that doesn't have them? And if we can do that, then we're in a really much better situation, and we're thought leaders in the world and moving the internet forward one step more. Because IPv6 doesn't really solve the problem. In fact, it exacerbates it quite a bit, makes it much worse. And if you think of software is kind of like an art form, and I think it is.
Absolutely.
And then if software is art, then you're limited to basically like a painter could paint whatever they can imagine using the paintbrush and the tools at their disposal. Same thing with a software developer. You're limited to your imagination. And so if you can imagine a protocol that works and doesn't have these kinds of problems, then it probably begs the question, you probably build that protocol. So it's something exciting for me that I think the world needs to get kind of focused on, but haven't quite hit the wall yet with the existing internet to really force that function. So I kind of expected some nasty thing to happen by now, but it still seems to survive.
Yeah. Huh?
Yeah.
That's the thing I kind of find fascinating. And we're almost at the end, but one of the things that you also said to me, so I'll put it out there for people to think about, and then they can take it up with us or take it up with you, and it's a conversation we're going to have again later. But you posited that maybe because the current internet doesn't really have a solution with the protocols in a way that's established, that we've got to think of it the way that the telephone replaced the telegraph and whatnot. And it's something Paul and I on other parts of the Security Weekly platform, we've talked to some really impressive people that have been at those protocol level decisions and those early groundbreaking things 30, 40 years ago, that when we get a chance to say, knowing what you know now, would you do it differently? And they all say, yep, sure would. So it's interesting that you're spending time in an R&D capacity looking at maybe we need to rethink the protocols, maybe we need to rethink it. And I know there's a lot of people right now probably either both nodding their heads and then sitting there going, how would we possibly do this? But as we look at the way that wireless is rolled out around the world, the way that we do internet around the world, the way that we do IoT and it's coming up now, I think it's kind of interesting that somebody's sitting here saying, well, maybe there's a different way, and kind of working toward it. That said, somebody listening today thinking about doing a startup, now that you've been through the cycle 5 times, and now that you're doing something in an R&D capacity, what advice do you have for somebody, and or where would you tell them to focus? You could take that either way, either or both, whichever one seems more exciting to you.
Oh boy. Well, at least as far as, if you're a founder of a startup, the relentless pursuit of your goals and ideas that's like number one. You have that passion and you can't let go of it. As far as security goes, there's so many really cool, inexpensive cloud services out there that while you're building your startup, you could leverage really amazing technology that's not terribly expensive at ground one. Just making sure that that as you start to scale whatever it is you're doing, it's going to get much more expensive than doing it in a much more kind of enterprise or kind of a correct fashion. But leveraging all these different technologies that exist that are inexpensive, it's great. I mean, you can turn your team from 3 guys into 40 just by using the right services. So, trying to reduce the things that kind of get in your way and cause blockers, leverage the things that other people, smart people have worked on, is one of the key components. Trying to limit the amount of work that you have to do in-house at the beginning is pretty critical. I don't know. Does that kind of answer your question, or?
Yeah. No, I think that's a lot of really good insight. If somebody wants to talk about DDoS or the type of stuff, how do they find you? Or do they? Are you hiding?
Barrett Lyon. I hide, actually. You can't find me. No, I'm on Twitter at Barrett Lyon. Just catch me there, or you can email me if you can track my email down.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, Barrett,
I always figure that's a good sorting function, right? If they can find your email, okay,
that's right.
Good enough.
Yeah, if they can find it, then sure, why not?
Well, Barrett, thank you so much for appearing on Startup Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back, talk about some startup news and articles. Stay tuned.